One last way that we want to look at absolute and relative ideas is when we have percents of other percents. And keep in mind that percents of other percents, we really never know what the actual number of people are affected by these things because they're not giving us the out of, like, what is 30% of however many people that actually were. They're just reporting a percent, which can run us into some troubles. So let's look at this information from the CDC. So from 2011 to 2016, current cigarette smoking declined among middle and high school students. About 2 of every 100 middle school students, or 2.2%, reported in 2016 that they smoked cigarettes. This was a decrease from 4.3%. So notice we're using two different time periods. So their statement is accurate in that there was a decline between those two time periods. Okay, but we don't know that the actual number of students has declined because we don't know how many students were asked in 2016, and we don't know how many students were asked in 2011. We're hoping that it's the same amount, but it's not necessarily true because they don't report that. We also see that the current use of e-cigarettes increased among middle school students from 2011 to 2016. So they're saying that in 2016 there was 4.3%, and then in 2011 there was 0.6%. So that in fact is an increase. Again, we don't know how many students were actually asked. All right, so now we have a couple different things that we can do. We can state the change between those just to verify what they're talking about. And so if we were looking at the changes, remember it's got to be two different time periods, but the same thing we're talking about. So if we wanted to check this first one, we know that the newest information is, so the absolute change is equal to the newest one, which is 2.2%, minus the 4.3%. And this, in fact, is going to give us a negative answer. So there was a decrease. Again, we don't know how many. This was the actual decrease as a percent, which kind of does not make a whole lot of sense, but is what they are talking about here. So then the relative change is equal to, and these are just the calculations, I haven't finished the answer, so 1.9%. A couple things we want to talk about, divided by 4.3%, the old value, the oldest value, which is the 4.3%. And that calculation will give us what we, the size, remember that relative change is the size of the actual change. And so we get 0.44, let's see, 0.4418. So that's 44.1%, but again, that 8 is going to force the 1. So we end up, and this is negative, a negative 44.2%. Okay, so now how would we answer these questions? Because they're negative. So the absolute change is there is a decrease of 1.9% or a decrease of 44.2%. This is the size. This is the actual decrease. Again, we don't know how many students are involved, but that's what that information is telling us. Now, if we look at comparing cigarettes to e-cigarettes, so we want to look at, now we want two different things, so cigarette smoking and e-cigarettes, but it has to be in the same time period that we want to do this in. So let's say we want to look at the 2011 information. So for 2011, e-cigarettes were 0.6%. And for cigarette smoking, it was 4.3%. And so now we have to decide which one is being compared. So we're taking cigarette smoking compared to e-cigarettes. So this would be our standard. And so this is our comparing. So what that would be, so our absolute difference would be calculated as 4.3% minus 0.6%. And then the relative difference, so this is going to be 3.7%. And the relative difference is 3.7%. Again, notice I'm not doing anything with the percent signs. I'm not changing to a decimal by any means. These are using them as the value that they are. And we're going to divide that 3.7% by 0.6%, which gives us 6.1666, and so on and so forth. So remember, we got to move our decimal 2 places or multiply by 100. So our decimal place would end up here. And then the 6 makes, the last 6 makes the 6 next to it a 7. So we get 616.7%. So that would mean that cigarette smoking it is increased by, or is more than, let's see, cigarette smoking is 3.7% or 616.7% more than e-cigarette smoking in 2011.